I have a few people here who are going to talk about really interesting stuff, and so I'll give them the mic.
Thank you so much. So the interesting people are us. So me, some of you probably know me. I work at Vermonster. Taylor, who also works with me, and Brennan, who works at Smile. We have backgrounds and stuff. We don't really need to get into it probably because I don't know how much time we have.
Something with drinking or
no? No.
Well, yes, but no.
Where's the real moderator? Get this heckler out of here. Okay. So, problem statement. So we're finding that there's a lot of growing demand for integrated decision support. A lot of this has to do with there's more and more knowledge just getting put out into the world, and there's healthcare economics that are trying to incentivize quality, which also means more best practice adherence and guidelines. The challenge, or I guess the problem with all this at the bottom there is that this information isn't always available. It might not even be in an EHR. It might not be computable. It might be in notes. And so what do you do when that happens? And it's pretty much inevitable. And so what we wanted to do was to build an interactive process that prompts whoever's using the system for the information that's missing. And we wanted a user experience where the answers may be pre-populated based on what is documented, and also the option to create inferencing rules. Sometimes you can calculate like BMI if you know height and weight, or if you know the staging of a tumor, you can calculate the stage, stuff like that. And we also wanted to allow a user to review and potentially change the answers. And the principles we followed is we wanted to use as much existing FHIR as possible. We didn't want to make a whole bunch of new stuff, ideally. We also wanted to avoid duplication. So we find when we're creating guidelines, the main structure is a plan definition, and with its nested actions that can have references to either other plan definitions or other activity definitions. We have like an entrance logic into these nodes, like an entry condition called an applicability condition. And we didn't want to author a questionnaire up front with all the enable logic and then duplicate all that same logic into the plan definition. And so the approach that we're taking here, and we have a couple demos, is to basically author the plan definition and build the questionnaire from that kind of in a dynamic fashion. And we also want to make sure that we're following CPG and SDC. And the last bullet is subjective. We wanted to make it reasonably implementable. You be the judge. So we have a demonstration, and we actually got 2 different systems to demo the same use case. And then I think Brendan has an additional one to show some more features around this idea. So I think I'll hand it off to Taylor, who's going to do the first demo, and then we'll switch to your laptop after.
Yeah, I have this.
Should we turn this
Hopefully, can you hear me okay? Yeah.
on? Yes.
Okay.
Is that on? Is hers on? The recording?
I don't know if it's on.
Okay. Well,
Switched on?
does
Is
it?
the switch on?
It was. Here. Might not be working now. It's like just not lighting up. I can try.
Do you want me to
to
hold? Because you don't like to type and do the thing. That
No,
was
I'll
the
be
whole.
okay with it. I'll be just fine. I'll take
Right.
it. That's okay.
What if I just hold it?
It's okay. I will be just fine with this.
I
All
love the
right.
awkwardness.
Okay, so we're to demonstrate this. I'm first going to share how we can piece together some of the operations from SDC and CPG to generate questionnaire and then feed that data back into apply. And then Brennan's demo is going to focus on wrapping actually all of those steps into the apply operation. So we have some example content here, a rheumatoid arthritis guideline, and we're using a specific recommendation from that guideline for monitoring patients who are taking the medication sulfasalazine. So this recommendation says that for patients taking the medication, they should have some lab work every 6 months. So we have an example patient, John Doe, who's in clinic for follow-up. His practitioner sees that he has a medication request for sulfasalazine in his chart, but he has no labs documented. And so in order to get the information that we need, in order to determine if this recommendation is applicable to him, we want to render like a prompt to the user with these 2 questions. Is the patient taking the medication? When was his last CBC? And then additionally, we want some pre-population here because we know that we might infer that he's taking the medication sulfasalazine. It was in his medication list. And then we'd want the provider just to verify that information. They could change this response. Maybe the patient, it's outdated and they're not taking it anymore. And then could also supply a date for his blood work if he were able to report that or information was coming somewhere else. So just to familiarize a little bit with this content, in CPG, we have this modeled as a rheumatoid arthritis guideline pathway definition, which is just a profile on plan definition. And you'll see here we have some actions that would apply to all patients with rheumatoid arthritis. We want to take some specific steps, beginning of treatment, then screening, monitoring. So if we follow this all the way down to our recommendation for today, we have a recommendation definition, sulfasalazine monitoring, with a library that specifies some applicability logic and CQL, and 1 action on that plan definition that has that more specific recommendation and applicability. Order this test if the patient's taking the medication. But again, we had 2 pieces of data that we needed to assess that recommendation. And so what you see here are inputs or data requirements on the applicability. So if we take a look at these are modeled as case feature definitions in CPG. So that allows us to add these extensions where we can add the inferencing logic that Brian referred to earlier, as well as some assertion logic, if maybe this is already documented and in our patient context. And so what we see in the CQL is that we're looking to determine our inference rules, we're looking for medication request from a sulfasalazine medication value set. If the patient has one of those medications, then we return this inference with the instantiated case feature. So this is just our observation about the patient saying if they're taking the medication or not. We'll have a value Boolean here. And then we also have an assertion because we might already have that instance of the feature available. And we have some coalesce logic where we prioritize an assertion over inference. So we have the same for last CBC. This is going to be a value date time instead of Boolean. And then finally on this action, if this is applicable, we have another definitional resource, an activity definition as a service request to order the CBC. So with that, I think we should look at the first step in this process of generating the questionnaire. In order to do this, we've proposed use of the $sign questionnaire operation and the core spec which is used on structure definition. The modification we've proposed here is like typically structure definition is going to map element definition over to questionnaire items. And in our case, we really don't need every element from the snapshot and differential. And so we've proposed here just some modifications where we might have a minimal parameter that we can pass in and say, we really just want elements from the differential and required elements from the snapshot. And we'll see where this is important later on when we need to then actually extract this data back to observations about the patient. But this is something that's a work in progress. We'd welcome feedback on this and just kind of our processing semantics here. But if we look at the actual call here, can you see, can everybody see that? A little small. Any better? Okay. So this, we have our CPG engine running here that has the $ questionnaire operation. Other modification is that we're supplying in our parameters a plan definition rather than just a structure definition. So because we have all of those inputs on the plan definition that are structures, we're just in this operation obtaining all those inputs and returning a questionnaire for each of them, or rather turning a modular questionnaire. So what you're seeing in the response here is the modular questionnaire that points to 2 sub-questionnaires, one for active sulfasalazine and one for last CBC. And then also this actually is a bundle, have the modular questionnaire with the now 2 questionnaires that it points to. And so this one represents active sulfasalazine feature. We'll have, let's see, a top level grouping, and we can see that the definition maps back. This is how we kind of identify active sulfasalazine as an observation. This is the path on the element definition. And then we have our status, which is, we'll see hidden from the user. This is not something we need to render. They really only need the value to be confirmed from the user. And then we also have an initial value here, and this is something that we've also been discussing. Next step will be pre-populating questionnaire response. So if we need this initial value on the questionnaire is up for debate, but at the moment we see that pre-populated. So we have the same for code. And then our value. So this is our value Boolean pre-populated as true from that inferencing logic that we had. And then we have our last CBC questionnaire as well, follows a similar pattern. Just one distinction is that the date time for that is not, we don't have an initial value. Yes?
So does it mean the...
Do you ask questions now or at the end?
What do you want to do? What questions
Go
now?
ahead.
If it's-
Ask your question.
I mean, we'll go on like this. Look, this will turn into total stand-up comedy if I'll use the mic to ask the question. Okay. I was wondering, you're executing the operation on a plan definition rather than a structure definition,
Yes.
right? Does that mean that the plan definition has all the reference to structure definitions and the references to all the logic, the CQL logic and libraries and blah, blah, blah? That's all in the plan definition?
Yes.
And this questionnaire method just magically picks that up and then produces all this beautiful stuff.
It loops around all the action inputs, which are references to structure definitions. So it like rolls them all up.
That's impressive.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and that's a good point. I mean, that needs to be clarified if it wasn't clear. So it, yeah, and the inputs, those structure definitions have all the logic on them because of the CPG expressions. So it's all bundled in. Yeah. Yeah. And so along with that, if we leverage the SDC $populate operation, we also have some pre-population happening on our questionnaire response. So we have our value true and our lack of date time here for last CBC. So for this scenario, we're going to say that the user verifies true on active sulfasalazine and then actually submits a questionnaire response with a date. And this date happens to be more than 6 months old that this patient had a CBC. The next step, and also a questionnaire, so questionnaire response populate and $extract, we don't have example implementations for this demo, but this is just example output of what we'd expect to see. And so this would be, if we call $extract now, also part of the SDC spec, we're calling that on the questionnaire response. So the goal here is to now map all of those questionnaire response items back to these elements on structure definition, so we can create these instantiated observations. And this now, when we have an observation for active sulfasalazine, last CBC, both of those inputs for the applicability, those can be now used in our apply call. So here we see the apply call. We have, again, our plan definition, and then we have our patient data. And at this point, you'll see in the patient data the medication request, and then those two case features that we just instantiated from $extract. So now we have the necessary data. When we call apply, we see that in this case, because the labs are outdated, patients confirmed with taking the medication, this action that was on plan definition is applicable. And so in this case, we're creating a new resource in order to the service request for order CBC. So I think at this point, I'll hand it off to Brennan so that we can see how this can all now be wrapped up in the apply operation.
This one works, right? So you have to use that one.
That one works. I think I'll be fine without one.
Yeah, but it won't.
I think I'll be picked up anyway. We were going over earlier. Where's the?
It says dead battery.
But you need to be picked up, you're gonna use that.
Yeah, this one's on. I can plug in my HDMI cable. Make that a little bigger. So what I have here is a JPA starter server running. I've already loaded their content package here. I've just posted that. But what I have here is a sample of the apply parameters that they're running. You can't really see that very well, but if we run that, what you see here is, let me take this out and into a new page. So we've got our bundle with the request group at the top. You can walk down the chain and see what that's actually doing. But we also have our service request. Then down here at the bottom, we've got our questionnaire response, with a contained questionnaire. And you can see this questionnaire actually has a URL that is very similar to the URL. It is the URL of the plan definition with questionnaire in place of that. And then we tag that version with the patient and the date, the patient ID and the date. So it's a unique canonical resource for that patient. And this has actually already been, so this questionnaire was generated by all of the condition profiles that we saw as we were walking through the plan definition, and we populate them at that same time. So these have initial values. These initial values, unless they're hidden and coming directly from the structure definition, that value is coming from the patient context. And then we have the questionnaire response as well with all of the information. We used to, previously we would just return the questionnaire and leave it to the calling service to formulate that questionnaire response, but now we've trying to keep in line with the SDCIG, return that as a questionnaire response with the questionnaire contained. And then there's just another apply case here that essentially is returning the same thing, but and you can see we have, so we actually implemented the questionnaire operation against the structure definition resource because we wrap everything into apply. We left the structure definition questionnaire as just the vanilla. Here is a structure definition. Here's the questionnaire that would be generated from that. And that's generally generated as like a group item. I can show you this questionnaire here. Make that a little bigger. What did I copy? The wrong thing. Let's look at this one. So we eventually get to a questionnaire response. And we run that, and what we get back is our bundle of data. So you can see all the resources, observations that were extracted from that questionnaire response. So what's happening in this apply as we are, if we pass a questionnaire response into the data operation, we will automatically extract that. All of the resources that are extracted from that get added into, if there is an existing data bundle that was passed in with the operation, those will just be appended to that bundle. Otherwise, a bundle will be created with all of those resources added into it. So any evaluation that occurs throughout the workflow takes into account those new resources, the answers to your question. And what this allows us to do, I don't really have any content right now that displays this well, but what this allows us to do is essentially create a dynamic questionnaire specific to the workflow that you're taking based on the context of the patient that you're applying for. So you're limiting your set of questions to what is important to their case, and it allows you to dynamically go through that workflow. And we think that that's very powerful and very cool. So I think that's all I have. Is there any questions that anyone has, or anything
I think
more you
she
would like
was
to
gonna
see?
put one slide up to just talk about the two differences, but
Yeah.
Should work now. Yeah, I can hear it already.
Yeah. Yeah, so what Brennan was just sharing, and this is, again, something we're open to input on. Let's make sure the slide's up.
you said it takes 20 seconds.
It takes.
Well, what we're proposing is that,
The slide before, you wanted to. So that's like what you showed.
yes, so we showed the separation between like each of the SDC operations, then CPG apply, and this can kind of, the cycle in either case can keep repeating. So anytime new data is submitted via questionnaire response, you can keep applying and then generating questionnaire and continuing that. And we're showing a really small example, but this can start higher up in that tree on the pathway definition, and work through kind of all of those inputs required. What we're proposing as potentially part of apply in CPG is that if there are inputs on the plan definition, that we just automatically return that questionnaire and pre-populated questionnaire response in the apply operation. And then additionally, if we have questionnaire response, then there's data to extract, and that can also be wrapped into apply, as Brennan was showing, and just automatically added to the patient context that we're using to determine applicability. If you'd like to try any of this out yourself, the content that we use today is this last link here, and then we have the two engines that we're using to run apply and, in our case, $ questionnaire as well. Yeah, thank you. I think now we can move on to questions unless I think of anything else I missed, but yeah, open to feedback, questions.
I just want to say that was a good question you asked.
Thanks. And I have tons more, so if no one,
Yeah.
See, I know nothing about this, so my questions might be dumb, but here's a smart one.
I know nothing about this. I just wonder in the glue part, what does it look like in the plan definition that actually gives you the information that allows you to build up the questionnaire? Maybe you showed it already, I missed it.
In the plan definition?
Plan definition input action on
Should I go to the?
maybe the website, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a new way to visualize things, so it might be helpful to look at it here. Let's see, where's our? Okay, so we have our applicability, and then we have our two case features as input. So these inputs just specify these are data requirements in order to assess that applicability logic, this expression here. If we look at the actual CQL there,
If you'd have been chowdery.
we're pulling in both of those observations in order to assess the applicability. So we pull in both. We have some additional logic that says was that date of CBC within the past 6 months or not? And then we can use those definitions to determine if the applicability expression.
So the fact that it's an observation, the apply logic infers that I need a questionnaire to generate that, because I know the extract happens later on. So it's sort of built-in logic in the applied.
It does it based on the condition. So the condition has an input property, and that can have a profile. So if you have a profile on your input that is a structure definition that we have access to, we will use that structure definition, and we're essentially calling the questionnaire operation on that structure definition to generate that questionnaire item.
All dynamic.
All
So
dynamic at runtime.
If you can go back to the plan screen.
Right. So that's all referenced through the plan definition.
So, yeah, so if you look at that expression, what those inputs mean is to solve that expression, should order CBC, these are the two data inputs I need for that. And what we're doing is we're saying, okay, those are specified as a profile, a structure definition. We want to create a questionnaire from those profiles. And then when we answer them, we want to turn them back into the instances of those, what they're profiling, so those observations, because all the logic in CQL talks about observations. It doesn't talk about questionnaire answers. So it's like a cycle.
Yeah.
I was going to say, does that mean you didn't really need that profile, but there was no way to have a direct questionnaire on it? Like if you could have connected the questionnaire directly to the observation without the whole structure definition in the middle, would have that not been quicker?
The challenge at the beginning was what we were finding is we didn't want to build a questionnaire with all this enable N logic in it, because that logic, because we only want to ask the questions that we need to however they're going down this tree, this action graph. And so we don't want to ask tons of questions that aren't going to be reached potentially. We only want to ask the ones that are reachable right now. And if you answer them and recycle, you might get further down the tree and maybe you get prompted with new questions. And we didn't want to build all that twice. We didn't want to build that into the questionnaire with like all that enable N logic and then mirror all that same logic with the applicability expressions in the plan definition. So that's why we are dynamically building it.
Are you certain that
Is that a
it's
question?
is it kind of just obvious that the enable when would be redundant with the applicability, or is it possible that those could diverge? Or
It is a,
self-evident?
yes.
I see.
It's also the case that using a CPG case feature definition lets you associate the assertion and inferencing logic for that case feature. So the
One more time?
so the active sulfasalazine feature,
Yeah.
this is saying this is a data element in my logic. And there are extensions on here that let me say, this is the logic I can use to infer this information from the record versus the logic I can use to say, this is something that was asserted, right? You might find it in the record, or it might be asserted, like the physician said, this is true at this point. And so this pattern lets
Yeah,
you
it's just you
lets you
can't
plug that right into your logic, and then having the profiles are where you associate that logic. And so it's not just that we have this handy profile that characterizes all the data elements used in the logic. It's that those profile definitions actually point to the logic that determines what they are, their value.
So Bryn profile to profile to make this happen.
I normally profile, and so on. Okay, I had a question
That's a problem
here.
with this guy.
Hey Taylor, I really like the visual interface that you showed. Like two questions. One is, have you thought about evaluating the scalability and the usability of that visual interface as you expand to hundreds of plan definitions and activity definitions and service requests and things? And then the second question is, can users interact with that to dynamically update the corresponding FHIR resources?
So that might be a future, your second question there, that might be a future item. Would love to, this is, kind of a first run of this, but would like to actually be able to show apply output with this. Hadn't considered users being able to manipulate data, but that would be potentially a part of adding in that apply process where, we could manipulate the patient context before running that. And then your first question was, how does this scale when it gets larger? So I actually have used this with a much larger guideline. And right now, the solution for handling those larger guidelines when it's just, it does get messy to look at, is that there's a collapse. So we can collapse kind of this first level or expand. And then from there, this is really geared, want this to be something that a lot of people can use, but I think right now thinking about it from a content authoring perspective, being able to actually walk through a branch would, is a nice feature. And so at the time being, this is kind of the solution for scalability and handling those larger guidelines that you might be able to expand these, collapse and expand.
Very related question. Is this open source?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I don't have to buy Brian a drink to get it open sourced. So, forget I ever said that.
It's not.
hope to deploy it. It's right now. It's just within our reason framework.
She's the one that
That's right. Yeah, right now it's in reason framework, and hope to deploy it at some point.
So collecting data from the user and maybe saving some things back and then reacting to it and doing something else, is it that like CDS hooks? Is there an overlap, or am I dreaming?
Well, so you would use this apply, right? CDS hooks would call apply, right? There's a CDS on FHIR specification that how you make apply calls using CDS services, and how by putting a plan definition into the repository, will automatically instantiate a CDS service. We actually have, as part of that same branch that I was running, showing that that is all there as well. So if your plan definition is set up with a trigger that is an event action, it will automatically register a CDS service for that. And then, yes, you would be able to use this as a CDS hook.
So the way we would typically do that is the CDS hook service would call $apply, and if it made it all the way down to recommendations, it would show them as CDS hooks cards. But most of the time, or lots of the time, you just don't have all the information to get that far. And so in that case, your CDS hooks card might have like an app, open this app to continue sort of thing, and then you get the ability to see and answer questions.
I just want to add to that. Even when you get to the leaf node and you have that recommendation, you often still want to show the UI because you want to give the clinician the opportunity to change it. So if you just show the hook card, you're cutting out that opportunity for the clinician to both verify and have an opportunity to update.
Right.
So,
Well, you're saving clicks.
yes.
So can you also, you said ephemeral, whatever you call it, that it's in the ether, it doesn't persist. So would you persist this, or a patient can come back to this a week from now and pick up where they left off?
You
Or
could, but we wanted the operations to be stateless, and so that's why we pass around that context each time.
could you still store it though for later use?
Yes, you would be able to store that
Yeah.
and call it later, and you would essentially, like, every time we call, we're reevaluating everything. We're re-walking the path from the very top. So any updates to the patient context that have occurred in that time would automatically be registered, and your new questionnaire would take those into account. And then you would have all the latest data and would be able to, again, just start from where you were and start making your changes or looking at your recommendations.
Including
or
new pre-populate data?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
That answers my question too.
I just want to respond to Brian's click comment. CDS hooks, yes, CDS hooks will auto-launch the Smart on FHIR app. So if they don't change anything, maybe one more click to say, I agree.
So do you like it when like apps randomly pop up that you?
Now I have to buy a drink to argue over this.
Like,
Yeah.
I know Steve loves it when he gets a random Lyft advertisement on his phone.
How brittle or not is the whole scheme of this, especially as you in and out, and like and keep modifying the payload? Can it become like inconsistent internally, or especially if, or is it just very clear the rules of like assertions take preference over inferences? And
Yeah, that's all part of the CQL logic. So it's,
It's actually up to the author.
right.
The author decides
That's
whether
content decision.
yeah, whether an assertion takes precedence or not.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily need to be the case. It's in the CQL.
But is it a fair point that, like, maybe if you answered, like, if you as a clinician answered a question and then, that got saved off, and then a week later you came back and the answer to that question is now stale? How do you deal with that situation?
yeah, or there's a new
Or there's new data that contradicts it.
Yeah.
Well, and this is just making me think of how in populate like even if you pre-populate, everything is intended to be reviewed and confirmed. And of course, there's also the link period extension where you can specify the amount of time at which it will become stale. So.
Right, and if that time is longer than it takes you to complete the questionnaire.
And
Or you have to start over.
Okay, I think we're at time.
so,
3 more minutes. Punish them.
back to the point, you have CQL to answer that question. If it's stale, you can look at the time and say we're choosing the newer one.
Yeah, is there, you mentioned an extension. What extension is that?
The, for questionnaire populate, the link period extension, which is specifically, its presence is how we choose if we're going to pre-populate, and it specifies the time frame for which the data is valid. So if you had, for example, with observation-based population, if you had an observation that was outside of the time frame specified, the field wouldn't be pre-populated at all.
So you could potentially use that to help like address that concern, but I think it's a valid concern.
Bryn thinks it's a valid concern.
I like it when the crowd answers their own
Yeah. No, this is what an experimental session should be like. Right? You mark this as experimental. That's what this is. So I love it. I mean, nice that AI stuff, but this is really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, unfortunately, we're at time, so that was it. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.